I am Lieutenant Eliza Leach, 35 years old, and I have spent my whole life following orders. But no training course prepared me for the moment I pointed a gun at my own father. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday in Waco, Texas. When I kicked down my parents' door, I didn't see kind grandparents. I saw my mother, Carol, shaking my 8-month-old son like a defective doll, his head snapping back in dead silence. Beside her, my father, a war hero in the neighbor's eyes, was roaring in my 6-year-old daughter's face. "You must learn silence, you little brat. Tears are weakness." They thought they were training their grandchildren. They didn't know they had just triggered a war they would lose. Before I tell you how I put my own parents in prison, hit subscribe if you believe family should be a safe haven, not a concentration camp. The silence in my kitchen was louder than any mortar shell I'd ever heard in basic training. It had been 3 weeks since we buried Mark. My small house in Killeen, Texas, was a graveyard of good intentions. The countertops were buried under a fortress of Tupperware containers, tuna noodle casseroles, and green bean bakes sent by well-meaning neighbors who didn't know what to say to a 35-year-old widow. So they said it with cream of mushroom soup. The food had gone cold and stale, just like my life. I sat slumped at the kitchen table, still wearing my army fatigues. The digital clock on the microwave blinked at midnight. I hadn't showered in 2 days. On the table, a mountain of unpaid bills threatened to cause an avalanche. The life insurance policy was tied up in red tape, and the title of Gold Star family didn't pay for diapers. From the living room, I heard the soft, hiccuping sobs of Luke. My 8-month-old son was hungry, but my body was so exhausted, so depleted of everything, that I wasn't sure I could stand up to mix formula. Ella, my 6-year-old, was curled up on the rug in front of the television. She wasn't watching the cartoons, she was just staring at the static screen, her eyes swollen and red. She had learned to be quiet. Too quiet. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against a final notice from the electric company. I picked it up. The screen read, "The Commander." My stomach twisted. It was my father, Thomas. I pressed answer. "Hello, Dad." There was no, "How are you?" No, "I'm sorry about Mark." "I hear you're drowning, Lieutenant," his voice barked, gravelly and devoid of warmth. "I told you years ago. You marry that sissy teacher, you end up with nothing. Mark was weak. He died leaving you a mess because he didn't have the discipline to plan ahead." I closed my eyes, tears leaking out. Mark hadn't been weak. He was a high school history teacher who quoted 1 Corinthians 13:4 to me when I was angry. Love is patient, love is kind. Mark was the moral compass that pointed true north, the complete opposite of the man on the phone. But Mark was gone, and I was drowning. "I need help, Dad," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "The nanny quit. She said my hours are too unpredictable. I just got orders for a field training exercise. 2 weeks in the box. I have to report on Monday." "Of course she quit. Civilians have no stamina," Thomas scoffed. Then came the offer. The trap. "Bring the troops to Waco. Your mother and I will straighten out the ranks for you. We'll watch them." "Free of charge." Free. The word hung in the air. The average daycare in Texas costs $1,200 a month for 2 kids. I didn't have $1,200. I barely had 12. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We're family, Eliza. We take care of our own. Bring them tomorrow at 0800. The next morning, I drove the hour north to Waco. My parents' house looked like a recruiting poster for the American dream. 2 stories of brick, a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it was cut with scissors, and a massive American flag drooping in the still, humid air. My mother, Carol, was waiting on the porch. She looked like the grandmother from a storybook. Silver hair in a bun, an apron around her waist. But as I lifted Luke out of his car seat, her smile didn't reach her eyes. She pinched his chubby thigh. "He's underweight," she declared, her voice sugary sweet but sharp underneath. "Too soft. I'll fatten him up with a proper nutritional regimen." "Children need stomach discipline, Eliza." "He's a baby, Mom," I said weakly. "He's a soldier in training," my father boomed from the doorway. He marched down the steps, ignoring me, and loomed over Ella. She was clutching her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Paws, the last gift Mark gave her. Thomas snatched the bear from her hands and tossed it onto the porch swing. Leave the baggage at the perimeter. In this house, we don't whine. Stand up straight. Give your grandfather a proper salute. Ella flinched, her little body going rigid. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. Mommy? Dad, please, I started. We are doing you a favor, Eliza. Thomas cut me off, his blue eyes hard as steel. You want them safe? Or do you want to leave them with some stranger who doesn't care? We will teach them respect, something you clearly forgot. I looked at my watch. I was already running late for formation. The desperation clawed at my throat. It's just for 2 weeks, I told myself. He's just strict. They are family. Family is safe. I kissed Ella on the forehead, ignoring the way she stiffened. Be good for Grandpa and Grandma. I'll be back soon. As I reversed my truck out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. My parents stood there like 2 stone statues. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They just watched. A chill ran down my spine, a primal instinct screaming at me to slam on the brakes, to turn around, to grab my babies, and run. Mark's voice whispered in my head, "Love is kind." This didn't feel kind. But the radio blared, and the engine hummed, and the fear of losing my job, of losing the only income I had left, was louder than my intuition. I turned the volume up to drown out the voice in my head. What have you done, Eliza? I whispered to the empty truck. I thought I was finding a sanctuary for my children. I didn't know I had just signed their deployment orders into hell. The first weekend I drove back from the base to visit, the house was silent. Not the peaceful silence of a library, but the terrified silence of a trench before the whistle blows. I walked into the living room, expecting to trip over Legos or hear the chaotic noise of Saturday morning cartoons. Instead, the floor was pristine. Not a speck of dust. Not a single toy in sight. It looked like a showroom, not a home where 2 young children lived. Ella was sitting on the beige floral sofa. She wasn't sprawling or jumping. She was sitting with her back perfectly straight, her knees pressed together, and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the television, but the screen was black. Ella? I called out, dropping my duffel bag. She didn't turn her head. She didn't jump up to hug me. She spoke to the blank screen, her voice devoid of the sing-song melody she used to have. Grandfather says I am practicing patience training, Mother. I am not allowed to move for 30 minutes. My heart stuttered. Patience training? Ella, you're 6. Discipline is a muscle, Eliza. My father's voice came from the hallway. He walked in, nodding approvingly at Ella's frozen posture. She's doing well. When she arrived, she was a fidgety mess. Now she can hold a position. I forced a smile, pushing down the unease rising in my throat. It's just strictness, I told myself. Dad is just military. I didn't realize then that he was forcing a 6-year-old to do a modified stress position used in POW camps. Lunch was worse. My mother, Carol, placed Luke in his high chair. She set a bowl of green pea puree on the tray. Luke, usually a messy eater who loved to grab the spoon, sat with his hands gripping the sides of the chair, his knuckles white. He turned his head away when the spoon came near. He wasn't hungry. Open, Carol said. Her voice was soft, sweet like molasses, but her eyes were cold flint. When Luke kept his mouth shut, Carol didn't play the airplane game. She didn't coax him. Her hand shot out, her thumb and forefinger digging into his soft, chubby cheeks. She squeezed. Hard. Luke's mouth popped open from the pressure, a silent gasp of pain. Carol shoved the spoon in, scraping it against his gums. Mom! I started to rise from my chair. Stop, you're hurting him. Sit down, Eliza, Thomas barked from the head of the table. Look, he swallowed. You coddle him too much. That's why he's weak. He needs to learn that food is fuel, not a game. I looked at Luke. He had swallowed the puree. Tears were streaming down his face, but he wasn't making a sound. He had learned in just 5 days that crying meant more pain. Later that afternoon, I took Luke upstairs to change his diaper. As I wiped his legs, I saw it. On the inside of his left thigh, there was a dark, purple-yellow bruise. It wasn't a round bump from a fall. It was oval. It was the distinct shape of a thumbprint. The air left my lungs. I wrapped him in a towel and marched downstairs, my hands shaking. "Mom," I said, holding Luke out. "What is this?" On his leg. Carol glanced at the bruise while drying a dish. She didn't flinch. She let out a long, disappointed sigh, the kind that used to make me feel small when I was a teenager. "Oh, Eliza, here we go again with the drama," she said, shaking her head. "He was trying to crawl yesterday and slammed into the corner of the coffee table. I iced it immediately. You should thank me." She turned to face me, her expression full of pity. "Do you really think we would hurt our own flesh and blood? Is that what you think of us, after we took you in for free?" I looked at the bruise. It looked like a grip mark. But my mother's voice was so steady, so convincing. Am I crazy? I wondered. Maybe I am just paranoid. Maybe the stress of Mark's death is making me see monsters where there are none. I'm sorry, I mumbled. I just got scared. "Go back to base, Eliza," she said, patting my shoulder. "Leave the parenting to the professionals." I left. I went back to the field exercises, back to the mud and the noise, but the feeling of dread didn't leave. 2 weeks later, I was back in the barracks. I called home on FaceTime. Ella's face appeared on the screen. She looked thinner. Her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled at her eyebrows. "Hi, baby. How is school?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. Ella didn't look at the camera. Her eyes darted to something behind the phone, off screen. Her breathing was shallow. "I am fine, Mother. Grandparents are very good. I am learning a lot." She sounded like a recorded message. "Did you get the coloring markers I sent?" I asked. "The glitter ones?" Ella's eyes widened. She started to tremble, a visible vibration through the pixelated screen. I won't draw on the walls," she whispered, her voice cracking. Panic flooded her face. "Please, I promise. I don't want the closet. Please don't put me in the closet." "The closet?" I froze. "Ella, what closet?" Suddenly, a hand reached into the frame. The screen went black. The call ended. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I dialed back immediately. It rang and rang. Then, a text message popped up from my mother's number. Wi-Fi connection lost due to storm. "Kids are in bed. Do not call back. You will wake them." I sat on my bunk in the dark barracks, staring at the phone. There was no storm in Waco. I checked the weather app. Clear skies. If you have ever had a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong, but let someone talk you out of it, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever ignored your intuition to keep the peace? I gripped my phone until my knuckles turned white. The closet. The word echoed in my head, unlocking a memory I'd buried deep in the recesses of my own childhood. Something was wrong. And this time, I wasn't going to ask for permission to find out. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in Waco. The Texas sun was already baking the asphalt, but inside my pickup truck, the air was freezing. I had called in a family emergency to my commanding officer. I told myself I was just going to pick up Ella's forgotten pencil box. But deep down, the soldier in me knew this wasn't a supply run. It was a reconnaissance mission. As we turned onto the street of my childhood home, Ella's breathing hitched. It was a sharp, terrified sound that no 6-year-old should ever make. "We're almost there, baby," I said, reaching for her hand. "Just grab the box and we go." Ella didn't let go. Her small fingers clamped around my wrist like a vice, her fingernails digging into my skin hard enough to leave crescent-shaped marks. She wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at me, her eyes wide, glassy, and ancient with fear. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of Grandpa. Please don't make me go in there alone. Please." That look. It hit me harder than a physical blow. It wasn't a child whining about chores. It was the look of a private in a foxhole who knows the enemy is coming over the ridge. I slammed on the brakes 2 houses down. I killed the engine. "You stay here," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave into my officer's tone. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me. Do you understand? Ella nodded frantically, curling into a ball on the passenger seat. I got out of the truck. The street was quiet. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. It was the picture of suburban perfection. But as I walked toward the house, I didn't go to the front door. I slipped through the side gate, moving past the pristine rose bushes my mother, Carol, tended to with obsessive care. I moved silently, keeping my profile low, utilizing the blind spots I'd memorized as a teenager, sneaking out at night. I reached the back patio. The living room window was cracked open just an inch to let in the breeze. Then I heard it. It wasn't a cry. It was a shriek, high-pitched, ragged, and filled with sheer, unadulterated pain. It was Luke. My blood turned to ice. That wasn't the cry of a hungry baby. That was the cry of a human being in agony. "Shut your mouth!" My father's voice roared through the window, booming and terrifying. "You are a disgrace. A man does not cry. Silence is golden." Snap! The sound of leather cracking against something solid cut through the air. Whack! I stopped breathing. I pushed myself up, peering through the slat in the blinds. The scene that met my eyes burned itself into my retinas forever. It was a tableau of hell in a decorated living room. My mother was standing in the center of the room holding Luke, but she wasn't comforting him. She was holding him by his torso, shaking him. She was shaking my 8-month-old son back and forth with violent, rhythmic force. His tiny head snapped backward and forward like a rag doll, his eyes rolling back, his screams cut short by the whiplash motion. Shaken baby syndrome. The medical term flashed in my brain in neon red letters. Brain bleed, retinal hemorrhage, death. She was killing him. My mother, the retired teacher, the baker of apple pies, was murdering my son in silence. Next to her, Thomas stood with his face a mask of purple rage. He held his heavy Marine Corps leather belt doubled over in his fist. He wasn't hitting Luke directly. He was whipping the floor, the chair legs, the air inches from where the baby dangled, creating a cacophony of terror to traumatize him into silence. Proverbs 13:24, Thomas bellowed, raising the belt again. He who spares the rod hates his son. We will beat the weakness out of you. The world narrowed down to a tunnel. All sound faded except for the rushing of blood in my ears. The daughter in me died in that moment. The lieutenant took over. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the options. My hand flew to my ankle holster. I ripped the subcompact Glock out of its leather casing. I didn't disengage the safety yet, but my finger hovered over the guard. I needed my hands to fight, but I needed the steel to dominate. I sprinted around to the front of the house. I didn't check for a key. I didn't knock. I channeled every ounce of rage, every push-up, every mile run, every drop of grief for my dead husband into my right leg. I launched a front kick directly at the lock mechanism of the solid oak door. Boom! The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. The door flew open, banging violently against the interior wall. I stormed into the hallway, weapon drawn, moving with the predatory speed of a mother lion. Thomas and Carol spun around. The belt froze in mid-air. Carol stopped shaking Luke, her hands still gripping his ribs. They didn't see Eliza, the disappointment. They didn't see the grieving widow. They saw a woman with eyes devoid of mercy, holding a gun, ready to tear the world apart. "Drop him!" I roared, a sound so guttural it hurt my throat. "Get your hands off my son, now!" My father took a step forward, his arrogance blinding him to the danger. "Now, Eliza, put that away. We are just disciplining." I raised the weapon, leveling it at the center of his chest. My hands did not shake. I hissed, my voice deadly quiet now. "Back away from my children, or I will treat you like the hostile you are." For the first time in 35 years, I saw something new in my father's eyes. Fear. I drove the 40 miles back to Killeen, doing 80 on the highway, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every 5 seconds. I expected to see Thomas's truck barreling down on us, high beams flashing, coming to reclaim his property. When we finally reached my apartment complex, I didn't just lock the door. I engaged the deadbolt, the handle lock, and the chain. Then I wedged a heavy dining chair under the knob. It was the behavior of a paranoid woman, or a soldier who knows the enemy has the keys to the perimeter. The adrenaline crash hit me the moment the apartment was secured. My hands started shaking so violently, I dropped my keys. I stripped Luke down on the living room rug to assess the damage. Under the fluorescent lights, the truth was mapped out on his skin. There were finger-shaped bruises on his ribs, where Carol had gripped him to shake him. There were older, yellowing marks on his thighs. Ella was sitting in the corner, wedged between the sofa and the wall. She wasn't crying. She was rocking back and forth, her knees pulled to her chest, muttering a mantra that broke my heart. I'm sorry, I won't make noise, I'm sorry. I pulled them both into my lap, burying my face in their hair, weeping until my chest ached. I had no husband to call. I had no parents, not anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I hadn't called in 15 years. Becca, I choked out when the line connected. You were right about everything. Becca arrived 2 hours later. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like the nightmare my parents always warned me about. Her hair was dyed a violent shade of electric purple, and intricate tattoo sleeves covered both arms. She smelled like antiseptic and menthol cigarettes, the scent of an ER nurse who had seen too much. She didn't hug me. She walked straight to Luke, her eyes scanning his injuries with professional detachment, though her jaw was clenched tight enough to snap. Then she looked at Ella, who flinched when Becca reached out a hand. Becca retracted her hand slowly. She turned to me, her dark eyeliner smudged, her eyes identical to mine, the eyes of a survivor. They did the recruit training on them, didn't they? Becca asked. Her voice wasn't angry, it was tired. Break them down to build them up. I didn't know, I whispered, shame burning my throat. I thought it was just strictness, like with us. Becca laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She sat on the coffee table, facing me. Eliza, look at me. Why do you think I left when I was 16? Why do you think I lived in my car rather than stay in that house? Because you were rebellious, I recited the script Thomas had drilled into me. Because you were the difficult one. No, Becca said sharply. I left because I wanted to stay alive. She rolled up the sleeve of her scrubs, pointing to a jagged white scar on her forearm. Then she pointed to the closet in my hallway. Do you remember the closet under the stairs in Waco? The one with the cleaning supplies? A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. The time-out room, I said automatically. It wasn't a time-out room, Elle. It was a sensory deprivation tank. Do you remember when I broke that ceramic angel? How long was I in there? The memory hit me like a physical blow. The smell of bleach and old damp wood. The total, suffocating darkness. All night, I whispered. 12 hours, Becca corrected. I was 7. I pissed myself because I was too scared to knock on the door. And do you remember what Mom said through the door when I cried? I did. I could hear Carol's voice, cold and dispassionate, drifting through the wood grain. Endure it, Rebecca. The world doesn't care about your tears. Cry quietly. That isn't discipline, Becca said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. That is torture. They weren't raising children. They were breaking horses. You became the perfect soldier to survive. I became the rebel to survive. But we were both just victims. I stood up and walked to the bathroom mirror. I pushed back my bangs, revealing a small, faint scar just below my hairline. I fell down the stairs when I was 8, I said, repeating the story I'd told everyone, including Mark, for my entire life. You didn't fall, Becca said from the doorway. Dad pushed you. You were walking too slow. He shoved you, and you hit the banister. Then he told you that you were clumsy, and you believed him because believing him was safer than knowing your father wanted to hurt you. I stared at my reflection. The lieutenant, the officer, the strong, disciplined woman who never complained, who followed orders, who kept her shoes shined and her emotions locked away. It wasn't strength. It was a survival mechanism. It was a trauma response honed over 3 decades of walking on eggshells. I hadn't sent my children to safety. I had sent them back into the same meat grinder that had shaped me. The realization brought me to my knees. The love I had been chasing from them my whole life was just a transaction. Compliance for safety. Silence for food. I looked back at the living room. Luke was finally sleeping, exhausted from the pain. Ella was watching us, her eyes wide and wary. I wiped the tears from my face. When I looked back at Becca, the lieutenant was gone. The mother had taken her place. "They are never touching them again," I said. My voice was low, devoid of the trembling that had plagued me for weeks. "I am going to burn their world down, Becca. I'm going to take everything from them." Becca walked over and took my hand. Her grip was strong, calloused from years of lifting patients onto gurneys. "I've been waiting 15 years for you to wake up, little sister," she said. "This time, we fight together." For 2 months, I let myself believe the war was over. Life in our new apartment had settled into a fragile rhythm. We were attending therapy twice a week. Ella had started drawing with colors again, not just black charcoal, and Luke had finally stopped flinching every time I raised a hand to brush my hair. We were healing. I had secured my perimeter, locked the gates, and convinced myself that as long as I kept Thomas and Carol Doyle out of our lives, the evil was contained. I was wrong. Evil doesn't retire, it just finds new victims. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen pouring coffee, enjoying the rare quiet when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Becca. No words, just a hyperlink to Facebook. I tapped it, expecting a funny meme or maybe a listing for a used car she wanted to buy. Instead, the screen loaded the Waco Community Neighbors page. A sponsored post was pinned to the top, garnering hundreds of likes. "Welcome to Doyle Family Daycare. Home-based childcare provided by retired Master Sergeant Thomas and teacher Carol. We specialize in structure, discipline, and traditional values. Accepting ages 6 months to 5 years." The ceramic mug slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor and shattered, hot coffee splashing across my bare feet, but I didn't feel the burn. All I felt was the cold, suffocating grip of terror. They hadn't stopped. They had just changed their target demographic. I scrolled down, my thumb trembling. They had a website. It was slick, professional, and terrifyingly deceptive. The homepage featured a photo of my father in his dress blues, medals gleaming, standing next to my mother, who was holding a tray of her famous apple pie. The slogan ran across the bottom in bold, patriotic blue letters. "Discipline creates genius." And the reviews. They were already there, fake 5-star testimonials planted to lure in unsuspecting parents. "The Doyles are miracle workers. My son used to throw tantrums, but after 1 week here, he is so well behaved." I read that and felt bile rise in my throat. I knew what well-behaved meant in the Doyle household. It meant a child too terrified to speak. It meant a toddler dissociated from reality to escape the pain. I clicked on the gallery. There was a photo of a little boy, maybe 3 years old, sitting at a small wooden desk. He was wearing a starched polo shirt. His hands were folded perfectly on the desk. He wasn't smiling. His eyes were blank, staring at nothing. It was the same look Ella had when I found her. The 1,000-yard stare of a broken spirit. "We have to go back," I told Becca an hour later. "Eliza, you can't go near that house," she warned, though she was already grabbing her car keys. "If he sees your truck—" "We take your car," I cut her off. "We do recon. I need to see it with my own eyes." We took Becca's beat-up Honda Civic, a car my father would never deign to notice. I sat in the passenger seat, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, my military-issue binoculars in my lap. The neighborhood looked the same, but the house had changed. The chain-link fence in the backyard was gone, replaced by a 6-foot-tall wooden privacy fence. "They fortified the perimeter," I muttered, raising the binoculars. "They don't want the neighbors seeing what happens in the backyard anymore." I scanned the gaps between the wooden slats. Movement. My father was there. He wasn't wearing his dress blues now. He was in a stained undershirt, his face flushed that familiar, dangerous shade of red. He was holding the arm of a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4. She was wearing a pink dress and crying, trying to pull away. "Stop resisting." I read his lips more than I heard the words. He didn't scoop her up. He yanked her arm so hard her feet left the ground. She stumbled and fell into the dirt. He didn't help her up. He jerked her arm again, dragging her toward the back door like a sack of garbage. My gaze shifted to the kitchen window. The curtains moved. My mother was standing there, watching. She saw her husband dragging a sobbing child across the yard. She didn't open the door to intervene. She didn't call for help. Slowly, deliberately, Carol pulled the blinds shut. "Drive," I choked out, dropping the binoculars. "Becca, go, now." As we sped away, the rage that filled me wasn't the hot, explosive anger I'd felt when I kicked down their door. This was different. This was cold. This was calculating. This was the resolve of a soldier who realizes the enemy isn't just attacking her platoon. They are attacking civilians. "They are getting paid to do it," I said, my voice shaking. Parents are paying $1,200 a month to have their children tortured because they trust the uniform. They trust the nice retired teacher. "We can call CPS again," Becca said, gripping the steering wheel. "And say what?" I countered. "That I saw him dragging a kid. He'll say she was throwing a tantrum and he was guiding her inside. Without physical evidence, without marks, it's his word against ours. And the community loves him." I looked out the window at the passing telephone poles. I thought about that little girl in the pink dress. Tonight she would go home and cry, and her parents might punish her for being difficult, not knowing she had spent the day in hell. "If I do nothing, a child is going to die," I said softly. "It won't be Luke. But it will be someone's Luke, and that blood will be on my hands." If you believe that people who abuse children often hide behind a mask of respectability, like a uniform, a religious title, or a perfect reputation, smash that like button right now. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever met a wolf in sheep's clothing who everyone else thought was a saint? I turned to Becca, my eyes dry and hard. The victim was gone. The hunter had arrived. "We aren't just going to report them," I said. "We are going to destroy them. But we need a smoking gun. We need proof that no judge in Texas can ignore." The war room was a booth at a diner in downtown Killeen. Across from me sat Jake, a former JAG officer I had served with at Fort Hood. He was the best legal mind I knew. But today, he was looking at me like I was asking him to defuse a bomb with a hammer. "It's not enough, Eliza," Jake said, pushing his coffee cup away. "I believe you. I know you. But the law doesn't work on gut feelings." "I saw him dragging a child," I argued, keeping my voice low. "You saw a grandfather escorting a tantruming toddler inside," Jake corrected, playing devil's advocate. "That is the defense they will use. Look, your parents are white, church-going, tax-paying homeowners. Your dad is a retired master sergeant with a silver star. Your mom is a retired teacher. In the eyes of a Texas judge, they are pillars of the community. CPS has already cleared them once." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "To get a warrant to enter that house, you need probable cause. You need hard evidence. You need a smoking gun." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll get you the gun." The next phase was human intelligence, humant. I needed an asset on the inside. I spent 3 days staking out the local park where the mothers from my parents' neighborhood gathered. I identified my target, Lisa, the mother of the little boy I'd seen in the online gallery. Lisa looked like a ghost. She sat on a bench while her son, Max, played in the sand. She wasn't scrolling on her phone like the other moms. She was just staring at her hands, looking exhausted. I approached her. "He's about 3?" I asked, pointing to Max. Lisa jumped, startled. "Oh, yes, Max is 3. I sat down, leaving a respectful distance. "My son used to go to the Doyles, too. Until about 2 months ago." Lisa's head snapped toward me, the polite mask cracked. You know the Doyles?" "I'm their daughter," I said. Lisa let out a shaky breath. "Oh, thank God. Maybe you can tell me. Is it normal? Max used to be so happy. Now, he wets the bed every night. He screams if I drop a spoon in the kitchen. Your mother says it's just a phase, that he's learning impulse control." "It's not a phase, Lisa," I said softly. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photo I had taken on the day of the raid. It showed the bruising on Luke's thigh. This is what impulse control looks like, I said. They aren't teaching your son, they are breaking him. Lisa stared at the photo. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she began to weep silently, the tears of a mother who had suspected the worst but was too afraid to name it. Help me stop them, I whispered. I have a plan. But I need Max to carry the payload. That night, my kitchen turned into a Black Ops workshop. I had purchased a high-end digital voice recorder, smaller than a pack of gum, voice-activated, with a 12-hour battery life. Becca used her nursing skills to perform surgery on Mr. Fluffles, Max's favorite teddy bear. She carefully opened the seam along the bear's back, removed some stuffing, and inserted the recorder deep into the bear's belly. She stitched it back up with surgical precision. It was invisible. We are sending a wire into the lion's den, Becca said, handing me the bear. On Monday morning, at 0700, I met Lisa in the grocery store parking lot 2 blocks from my parents' house. Max was buckled in his car seat, hugging Mr. Fluffles tight. I told him it's a secret mission, Lisa said, her voice trembling. That Super Max needs to keep his bear with him to protect it. You are brave, Lisa, I told her. Braver than you know. She drove off. I parked my car down the street, reclined the seat, and waited. It was the longest 8 hours of my life. Every minute was torture. My mind played out the worst-case scenarios. What if Thomas patted the bear down? What if he heard the faint click of the recorder activating? If he found it, he wouldn't just destroy the device. He would take his rage out on Max. I stared at the dashboard clock. 10 o'clock, noon, 2 o'clock. My phone sat on my lap, ready to dial 911 at the first sign of trouble. But the street remained quiet. The Doyle family daycare sign stood proudly in the yard, mocking me. At 4 o'clock, Lisa's SUV pulled out of the driveway. I followed her back to the parking lot. When she got out of the car, she looked pale. She handed me the bear. He wouldn't let go of it all day, she whispered. He said Grandpa was loud today. I took the bear. It felt heavy in my hands, not with weight, but with the gravity of what it contained. Go home, Lisa. Hug your boy, I said. I drove back to Becca's house, speeding the whole way. We went straight to her office and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 2 tries to find the seam Becca had stitched. I cut the thread. I pulled out the small black device. The red light was off. The battery had held. I plugged the USB into the laptop. A folder popped up on the screen. Audio file 001. Duration 7 hours, 42 minutes. I looked at Becca. She nodded, her face grim. I moved the mouse and clicked play. The room filled with the static hiss of the recording, followed by the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. And then, the nightmare began. The blinds were drawn in Jake's office, shutting out the bright Texas afternoon. The only light came from the glow of his laptop screen on the mahogany desk. The air conditioner hummed low, but the room felt suffocatingly hot, thick with tension. I sat on the edge of the leather chair, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Becca stood behind me, a hand on my shoulder. Jake adjusted his glasses, his face unreadable, as he plugged the USB drive into the port. All right, Jake said, his voice professional but tight. I'm going to skip through the silence. We need to find the interaction points. Brace yourselves. He clicked the mouse. The speakers crackled to life. For the first few minutes, it was mundane. The sounds of a normal morning. The theme song of Paw Patrol played in the background. Max was babbling to his bear, whispering about how Super Max was going to save the world. It was so innocent, it made my chest ache. Fast forward, I whispered. 0945 hours. Jake slid the progress bar. The audio skipped, distorted for a second, then stabilized. Crash! The sound of ceramic shattering against tile exploded from the speakers. It was so loud and sharp that Becca jumped. Then came the voice. My father's voice. Not the charming neighbor, not the decorated veteran. The monster. You clumsy little brat, Thomas roared. The audio clipped with the volume of his rage. Did you just spill the milk the Lord provided, You ungrateful little animal, you need a lesson in focus. I'm sorry, Grandpa, it slipped. Max's voice was high, trembling with terror. I'll clean it. Too late for that. Then came the sound that stopped my heart. It was a sound I knew better than my own name. The shh of leather sliding rapidly through belt loops, the heavy clink of the metal buckle hitting the floor. Snap. The belt cracked through the air like a whip. Thwack. It hit flesh. Ow! No, please, Max screamed. It wasn't a cry of discomfort. It was a shriek of raw, physical agony. Thwack, thwack. Proverbs 13:24. Thomas was panting now, the exertion audible. He who spares the rod hates his son. I am saving your soul, boy. Becca clapped both hands over her mouth, turning away, her shoulders heaving as she gagged. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. I was the witness. Is that enough? Jake asked, his face pale. Wait, I said, my voice ice cold. Wait for her. And there she was. My mother. She didn't scream for him to stop. She didn't rush in to protect the 3-year-old child cowering on her kitchen floor. Her voice cut through the sobbing with terrifying, calm authority. Thomas, not on the back, Carol said. She sounded like she was giving instructions on how to fold laundry. Hit him on the thighs and the bottom. His mother is picking him up at 4. Don't leave marks on his face or arms. We have to be smart about the discipline. Jake froze. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. She's coaching him, Jake whispered. She's not a bystander. She's the architect. Keep listening, I commanded. On the recording, the beating stopped. There was a scuffling sound, the friction of fabric on linoleum. Max was being dragged. No, no, please. Max's voice went from pained to hysterical. Not the dark room. Please, Grandma, I'm afraid of the dark. I'll be good. You can think about your sins in the quiet, Carol said softly. A heavy door slammed shut. Boom! Then, the distinct metallic click-clack of a deadbolt sliding into place. The recording became muffled. From behind the thick wood of the closet door, the closet under the stairs, my closet, came the sound of a terrified child hyperventilating in the pitch black. Let me out, Mommy. Mommy. I reached out and slammed the spacebar. Silence rushed back into the room, ringing in our ears. Becca was sobbing openly now, sliding down the wall to the floor. I looked at Jake. He wasn't looking at me like a lawyer anymore. He looked sick. Is that a smoking gun, Jake? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Jake swallowed hard. He opened his legal pad, his hand shaking slightly as he uncapped his pen. That is a felony, he said, his voice grim. Felony injury to a child, unlawful restraint, conspiracy. And with the religious rhetoric used during the assault, no jury in Texas will have mercy on them. That recording puts them away for 20 years, minimum. He looked at the USB drive as if it were radioactive. We have enough for an emergency warrant, right now. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was clear. The daughter who feared her father was dead. The woman standing in that office was an executioner. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands didn't tremble. I dialed 3 digits. 911. Emergency. What is the location of your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I took a deep breath, staring at the paused waveform on the laptop screen, the visual representation of a child's scream. This is Lieutenant Eliza Leach, I said, my voice steel. I am reporting an active case of severe child abuse at 104 Maple Drive. I have audio evidence of a felony in progress. Send the police. Send everyone. The raid went down at 1600 hours. I wasn't the one kicking down the door this time. I sat in an unmarked car across the street with Jake, watching through the tinted glass as Justice arrived in black Kevlar vests. The body cam footage, which was later released to the news, showed Thomas standing in the hallway, clutching his old hunting rifle. His face was a mask of indignant rage, the red laser dots of the SWAT team dancing on his chest like fireflies. I am a veteran, he screamed, his voice cracking. I fought for this country. You have no jurisdiction in my home. He didn't get to finish his speech. Two officers tackled him, driving his face into the hardwood floor he was so proud of. The rifle skittered across the tiles. For all his talk of war, he crumbled the moment he faced a real enemy. In the kitchen, my mother tried to play her final card. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her eyes rolled back and she slumped toward the floor, a theatrical feint worthy of a soap opera. The female officer didn't blink. She hauled Carol up by her arm, her grip unyielding. "Cut the act, ma'am. You're walking." But the real victory came a few minutes later. A paramedic walked out the front door carrying a small bundle wrapped in a yellow blanket. It was Max. He had been found locked in the closet under the stairs, soaked in his own urine, shivering in the dark, clutching the teddy bear that had saved his life. The trial took place 6 months later. Thomas and Carol arrived at the McLennan County Courthouse dressed as the pillars of the community they pretended to be. My father wore a sharp navy suit with an American flag pin on the lapel. My mother wore a modest floral dress and a string of pearls, clutching a Bible like a shield against the accusations. Their defense attorney, a slick man with a $100 haircut, tried to paint a picture of traditional values under attack. "These are good, God-fearing grandparents," he argued in his opening statement. "They are being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter who has been corrupted by modern permissiveness. Eliza Leach is the one on trial here, ladies and gentlemen. She is trying to criminalize discipline." For a moment, I saw the jury waver. They looked at the gray-haired couple and saw their own parents, their own Sunday school teachers. Then, the prosecutor played the tape. The courtroom fell into a silence so deep it felt like a vacuum. When the sound of the belt cracking against Max's skin filled the air, the jurors flinched physically. When my father quoted Proverbs while a child screamed in raw agony, a woman in the back row began to cry. But it was my mother's voice that sealed their fate. Her cold, calculated instructions on how to beat a child without leaving marks shattered her sweet grandmother facade instantly. The neighbors who had come to support them lowered their heads, unable to look at the defense table. I took the stand as the final witness. I didn't look at the jury. I looked straight at my parents. Thomas glared back with pure hatred, mouthing the word traitor. Carol just looked through me, as if I were a ghost. "You didn't raise us," I said, my voice steady, echoing off the high ceiling. "You broke us. You used fear and called it respect. You used torture and called it love. And I will not let you do it to one more child." Then Becca took the stand. She didn't say much. She simply turned her back to the jury and lifted her blouse, revealing the lattice of silver scars that crisscrossed her skin. The map of our childhood. A collective gasp went through the room. The defense attorney closed his notebook. He knew it was over. The judge, a stern woman with eyes that had seen too much of humanity's dark side, looked down at the defendants over her spectacles. "Mr. and Mrs. Doyle," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You stand here claiming to be soldiers of God and educators of youth. You are neither. You are bullies who hid your sadism behind titles in scripture. You preyed on the most vulnerable members of our society because it made you feel powerful." She adjusted her robe and looked at the paperwork. "Thomas Doyle, for 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and 5 counts of injury to a child, I sentence you to 18 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice." Thomas's jaw dropped. The arrogance finally drained from his face, replaced by the shock of a man who realized his war was over. He was 62. 18 years was a life sentence. "Carol Doyle," the judge continued, "for conspiracy, unlawful restraint, and failure to protect, I sentence you to 10 years. My mother let out a gasp, looking at her husband as if expecting him to fix it, to order the judge to stop. But Thomas was already being pulled to his feet by the bailiff. The judge raised her gavel. "This court is adjourned." Bang! The sound echoed through the room, a sharp, wooden crack that sounded nothing like a belt and everything like freedom. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 35 years. The weight on my chest vanished. The monsters weren't under the bed anymore. They were in handcuffs, and for the first time in my life, I was truly safe. 3 days after the sentencing, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Huntsville, the location of the state penitentiary. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the vibrating device. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Part of me knew I had to answer, just once. I needed to know if there was any shred of humanity left in the man who raised me. I slid my thumb across the screen. A mechanical female voice filled the line. You have a prepaid collect call from an inmate at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. To accept, press 1. I pressed 1. The line clicked. Eliza. The voice was rough, stripped of the booming authority that used to shake the walls of my childhood home. But the venom was still there. Hello, Dad, I said, my voice steady. Don't you call me that, he hissed. You are no daughter of mine. You are a Judas. You sold out your own flesh and blood for what? For attention? To destroy a legacy I built for 40 years? I waited for a crack in the armor, a moment of regret, a question about his grandchildren. But there was nothing. Just the cold, vacuum-sealed rage of a narcissist who had lost control. I did it to save my children, I said, and to save myself. You'll rot in hell for dishonoring your father and mother, he spat. I will never forgive you. Do you hear me? Never. A year ago, those words would have shattered me. I would have begged. I would have apologized. But today, sitting in my quiet kitchen with my children safe in the next room, I felt nothing but a strange, hollow pity. I don't need your forgiveness, I said softly. I need you to stay away from us. That is all I ever needed. I didn't wait for his response. Goodbye, Sergeant. I hung up. Then I opened my settings and blocked the number. But the war wasn't quite over. Thomas had been the general, but he had an army of enablers. In psychology, they call them flying monkeys. The people a narcissist manipulates to do their dirty work. For me, it was my Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob, people who lived 3 states away and hadn't visited in a decade. My phone began to light up with texts and voicemails. How could you do this to them? They are old people. You destroyed the family name. Your mother is sick with grief. After everything they sacrificed for you, this is how you repay them? By putting them in a cage. They didn't ask about Luke's bruises. They didn't ask about Max being locked in a closet. They only cared about the image of the family, the facade that I had smashed with a sledgehammer. I started to type a reply to my aunt, explaining the abuse, detailing the terror. Then I stopped. Don't, Jade, Becca had told me. Don't justify, argue, defend, or explain. They weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in the status quo. I deleted the draft. One by one, I went down my contacts list. Aunt Linda, block. Uncle Bob, block. Cousin Sarah, who said I was overreacting, block. With every tap of the screen, the circle around me got smaller, but the air got cleaner. I wasn't losing family. I was removing a tumor. That night, a severe thunderstorm rolled across central Texas. The sky flashed white, and the thunder shook the foundation of our apartment complex. I heard a scream from the bedroom. I rushed in to find Ella sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide and unseeing. She was thrashing against her sheets, caught in the grip of a night terror. I'm sorry, she shrieked, shielding her face with her tiny arms. Don't hit me. I won't cry. My heart broke all over again. The bruises on her skin had faded, but the bruises on her mind were still purple and raw. I gathered her into my arms, rocking her back and forth until her breathing slowed. Shh, baby, it's Mommy. You're safe. The thunder is just noise. It can't hurt you. Ella looked up at me, her face wet with sweat and tears. Are Grandma and Grandpa coming back? She whispered. Do they hate me because I told? I brushed the hair back from her forehead. I had to choose my words carefully. I couldn't lie, but I couldn't burden her with their hatred. No, baby, it's not your fault, I told her firmly. Grandma and Grandpa, they have a sickness in their spirits. It made them hurt people. But they are gone now. They can never, ever come back here. I promise. Ella held on to me for a long time before she finally drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I drove to the Central Texas State Veterans Cemetery. The rows of white marble headstones stretched out under the vast blue sky, orderly and silent. I walked to Mark's grave. The grass was green and freshly cut. I knelt down and pulled something from my pocket. It wasn't a flower. It was my Army Commendation Medal, the one I had received for service overseas. I pressed it into the dirt right above his name. "I did it, Mark," I whispered to the stone. "I completed the mission. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than deployment, but the kids are safe. I saved them from my family." The wind kicked up, rustling the oak trees nearby. I closed my eyes and imagined Mark standing there, his hand on my shoulder, that gentle smile on his face. Love is patient, love is kind. I had finally learned the difference between love and control. I stood up and wiped the dirt from my knees. I felt lighter. The heavy cloak of being Thomas Doyle's daughter had been shed. I wasn't a soldier following orders anymore. I wasn't a disappointment. I got back in my car and drove home. When I walked inside, I saw an old framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of me, my parents, and Becca from 20 years ago. We were all smiling, dressed in our Sunday best. It looked perfect. It looked like a lie. I took the photo out of the frame. I walked to the fireplace, struck a match, and held it to the corner of the glossy paper. I watched the flames curl around my father's face, then my mother's, turning their smiles into black ash. "Ashes to ashes," I whispered. The past was dead. The future started now, 1 year later. The Texas sun was rising over the rolling hills of Austin, painting the sky in soft shades of peach and lavender. It was a different kind of light here than in Waco, less harsh, more forgiving. I sat on the back porch of our rental house, a ceramic mug of steaming coffee in my hand. Inside, the house was chaos. Glorious, beautiful, uncontainable chaos. If my father could see my living room now, he would have an aneurysm. There were Legos scattered across the rug like colorful plastic landmines waiting to destroy a barefoot heel. There were throw pillows on the floor where we had built a fortress the night before and hadn't bothered to clean it up. There was noise. Becca was in the kitchen flipping pancakes, singing off-key to a pop song on the radio. Ella was sitting at the table, but she wasn't sitting still. She was wiggling, kicking her legs, and laughing. And she wasn't using charcoal anymore. Her paper was an explosion of neon pink, electric blue, and sunshine yellow. "Aunt Becca, look! I drew a dragon!" Ella shouted, holding up the paper. "That is the fiercest dragon I have ever seen," Becca replied, waving the spatula like a wand. "Does he breathe fire or glitter?" "Glitter," Ella giggled. "And he eats bad guys." I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I had transferred to a logistics unit at Camp Mabry in Austin. The hours were regular, no more surprise deployments, no more missing bedtime. Just then, I heard a crash from the kitchen. The sound cut through the laughter like a knife. My stomach muscles tightened, a reflex I hadn't quite unlearned yet. I stood up and walked to the sliding glass door. Luke, now a sturdy toddler of nearly 2, was standing next to his high chair. He had knocked his sippy cup off the tray with a sweeping gesture of excitement. A puddle of white milk was spreading rapidly across the hardwood floor. The room went dead silent. Becca froze at the stove. Luke looked at the milk, then looked up at me. His shoulders hunched up toward his ears. He squeezed his eyes shut and flinched, bracing himself physically. He was waiting for the yelling. He was waiting for the lesson on focus. He was waiting for the pain. It was the shadow of the past, trying to darken our future. It was the ghost of my father standing in the corner, holding a belt. I took a deep breath. I walked over to my son. I didn't tower over him. I knelt down on one knee so I was eye level with his terrified face. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. Luke opened one eye, trembling. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, not a mask I wore to survive. I picked up a kitchen towel and held it out to him. "Uh-oh," I said playfully. "It's just milk, Luke. It's just an accident. Accidents happen. We make messes, right?" Luke blinked. The fear in his eyes slowly dissolved, replaced by confusion, And then, slowly, relief. "Help?" he asked, pointing to the towel with a chubby finger. "Yes, you can help Mommy clean it up," I said. Together we wiped up the mess. There was no shouting, there was no shame. There was just a mother and a son cleaning a floor. As I watched him go back to eating his pancakes, shoving a syrup-covered bite into his mouth, I realized something profound. That moment, right there on the sticky kitchen floor, was my real victory. Putting my parents in prison was justice. But treating my son with kindness when he made a mistake, that was healing. That was breaking the cycle. I wasn't just raising children, I was raising ancestors. I was ensuring that the trauma stopped with me. The buck stopped here. Later that afternoon, while the kids were napping, I opened my laptop on the porch. I had started a blog a few months ago called The Commander Mom. It was anonymous, but I wrote about everything: the discipline, the closet, the guilt of the good daughter, and the terrifying freedom of going no contact. My inbox was full. I thought I was the only one. Read a message from a woman in Ohio. "My dad was a pastor and everyone loved him, but he was a monster at home," wrote a man from Georgia. "Thank you for telling me I don't owe them my life," wrote a young soldier stationed in Germany. I wasn't alone. We were an army of cycle breakers, finding each other in the dark. I thought about what the experts said about vulnerability being our greatest measure of courage. I thought about the idea of turning wounds into wisdom. They were right. I walked to the edge of the porch. The sun was high now, illuminating the oak trees and the wildflowers that grew wild and free in the yard. I looked at the faint scar on my arm, a remnant of my old life. And then I looked at the bright, happy drawings taped to the sliding glass door. I am not Lieutenant Eliza Leach, the disappointment. I am not the daughter of Thomas and Carol. I am Eliza, the mother. I am the protector. I am the one who walked through fire so my children would never know the smell of smoke. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are feeling trapped in a house that feels like a prison, listen to me closely. You do not owe your abusers your loyalty. You do not owe them your silence. You do not owe them access to your children just because they share your DNA. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who would bleed for you. It's about who makes you feel safe when you spill the milk. Stand up, speak out, break the chain. Because you deserve to be loved. Not trained, not disciplined, not controlled, just loved. Looking back, I realized that breaking the cycle of abuse isn't a one-time event. It is a daily choice to choose connection over control. To every parent or future parent listening, perfection is never the goal. Repair is. We often think discipline means punishment, but its root word simply means to teach. If we teach through fear, we raise fearful liars. If we teach through love, we raise honest leaders. The most powerful educational tool you possess isn't a rule book, it is your own apology. When you make a mistake, and you will, repairing that rupture with your child teaches them they are worthy of respect. That is how we truly change the world, one kitchen floor at a time. I know this story wasn't easy to hear. It certainly wasn't easy to live. But silence is where the darkness grows, and sharing our truth is how we finally turn on the lights. If my journey gave you hope, or if you are currently fighting your own battle for peace, please type, "I am breaking the chain," in the comments below. I want to see how strong this army is. And if you believe in protecting the innocent and standing up for what's right, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join our family. Let's make sure no one has to walk through the fire alone. Thank you for listening.